Close your eyes and imagine the endless grasslands of Mongolia, where the wind whispers secrets across the steppes, and the stars paint stories in the night sky. Tonight, we journey back 8 centuries to meet a boy born clutching blood in his fist, a child who would grow to conquer more land than any human before or since. A man whose name still echoes through history like thunder across the plains. This is the story of Temujin, the boy who became Genghis Khan, the man who changed the world forever. Let this tale carry you gently into dreams as we travel through time together. The year was 1162, though the exact date remains lost to history, somewhere in the harsh wilderness near the Onan River in northeastern Mongolia. A child was born into the Borjigin clan, and the moment he entered the world, the midwives gasped. The baby emerged gripping a blood clot the size of a knucklebone in his tiny fist. In Mongol tradition, this was a powerful omen, a sign that this child was destined to become a great warrior. His father, Yesugei, a minor chieftain of the Mongol tribes, had just returned from battle, where he had captured a Tatar chief named Temujin Ugei. Following custom, he named his newborn son Temujin, meaning of iron or blacksmith, never knowing that this name would one day make emperors tremble. Life on the Mongolian steppes was brutally hard. The land offered no mercy, no second chances. Families lived in felt tents called gurs, following their herds of horses, sheep, and goats across vast grasslands that stretched to every horizon. Winters brought winds so cold they could freeze a man solid in minutes. Summers scorched the earth until it cracked. Only the strong survived, and strength meant everything. Young Temujin learned to ride before he could properly walk. His small hands gripping the mane of a horse as his people had done for countless generations. He learned to shoot arrows while galloping at full speed, to track animals across bare rock, to find water where none seemed to exist, and to read the sky like other children read scrolls. When Temujin was 9 years old, his father took him on a journey that would change everything. Yesugei was taking his son to find a bride among his mother's tribe, the Olkanut. During their travels, they stopped at the camp of a man named Day Session. There, young Temujin met a girl named Borte, who was 1 year older than him. Despite his young age, Temujin was captivated by her intelligence and strength. Day Session, seeing something special in the boy, agreed to a betrothal. Following tradition, Temujin would stay with his future bride's family for a time. But Yesugei decided to leave his son there and return home alone. On his journey back, Yesugei encountered a group of Tatars. The Tatars and Mongols were blood enemies, having fought for generations. The Tatars recognized Yesugei and, pretending friendship, invited him to share their meal, but they had poisoned his food. Yesugei made it home, but the poison was already destroying his body from within. He died in agony, leaving his family vulnerable and unprotected on the merciless steppes. When news reached Temujin, he rushed home. But he was too late to say goodbye to his father. What happened next would have broken most children. Yesugei's clan, now led by a rival named Targatai, abandoned Temujin's family. In steppe society, a family without a strong male protector was worthless, a burden. Holin, Temujin's mother, was left alone with her children and no resources. They took what little they could carry and fled into the wilderness. Holin was an extraordinary woman, fierce and determined. She taught her children to dig for wild roots, to catch fish with their bare hands, to hunt marmots and birds, to survive on almost nothing. She told them again and again that they had only each other, that they must never betray their blood. But poverty and hunger breed desperation. One day, Temujin and his brothers caught fish in the river. His half-brother Begder, older and stronger, took the fish for himself and mocked the younger boys. This was not the first time. Begder constantly asserted his dominance, taking food from their mouths, threatening to replace Temujin as head of the family. Temujin and his full brother Kasar had enough. They tracked Begder into the hills and, with arrows drawn, confronted him. Begder, seeing death in their eyes, sat down calmly and asked only that they spare his youngest brother. Then they shot him dead. Temujin was perhaps 13 years old, and he had already become a killer. When Hoelin discovered what her sons had done, she was horrified and furious. She quoted Mongolian proverbs at them, comparing them to wild beasts that devour their own. But the deed was done. Temujin had learned a terrible lesson that would shape his entire life. In this world, you either dominate or die. There is no middle ground, no mercy for the weak. The rival clan learned that Yasuge's sons were still alive and potentially dangerous. Targatai and his warriors came to capture Temujin. They fitted him with a wooden collar, a kangu that prevented him from feeding himself or sleeping comfortably, and dragged him between their camps as a slave and a warning. But Temujin was not broken so easily. He waited, watched, and planned. During a feast, when his captors were drunk on fermented mare's milk, he struck his guard with the wooden kangu, knocking the man unconscious, and fled into the darkness. He hid in a freezing river, submerged up to his nose, as searchers passed within feet of him. A young man from the enemy clan named Sorganshira found him hiding, but seeing something remarkable in the boy's defiant eyes, chose to hide him instead of turning him in. When the search ended, Sorganshira helped Temujin escape back to his family. This act of unexpected kindness from an enemy taught Temujin another lesson. Loyalty and competence mattered more than bloodline. He never forgot Sorganshira, and years later, when he had power, he rewarded him and his family richly. As Temujin grew into young manhood, he remembered Borte, the girl he had been promised to years ago. With nothing but his reputation and his mother's encouragement, he traveled back to Daesechen's camp. Remarkably, neither Borte nor her father had forgotten him. They honored the betrothal, and Temujin married Borte when he was about 16. Her family gave them a beautiful gift, a black sable coat of incredible value. This coat would prove more valuable than gold. Temujin took the sable coat to Togrul, also called Ong Khan, the powerful leader of the Karaite tribe who had once been blood brother to Temujin's father. Temujin knelt and offered the coat, acknowledging Togrul as a surrogate father and asking for his protection. Togrul, impressed by the young man's bearing and remembering his friendship with Yasuge, accepted. This alliance gave Temujin his first real power base. But happiness never lasted long on the steppes. Shortly after his marriage, a raiding party from the Merkit tribe attacked Temujin's camp in the early morning darkness. The Merkits had a long memory. Years ago, Yasuge had stolen Hoelun from a Merkit warrior on her wedding day. Now they came for revenge, to steal Yasuge's daughter-in-law in payment. Temujin and his brothers escaped on their fastest horses, but Borte was captured and carried away. Temujin was devastated. For months, Borte lived as a captive, forced to become the wife of her captor. But Temujin refused to accept this fate. He gathered every ally he could, calling on Togrul and another childhood friend named Jamuka. Together, they assembled a force of 20,000 warriors and fell upon the Merkit camps like a storm of vengeance. In the pre-dawn raid, Temujin searched desperately through captured Gurs, calling Borte's name. Finally, he heard her voice answering through the darkness. He found her and brought her home. Shortly after, she gave birth to a son named Jochi. Whispers always surrounded Jochi's parentage, questioning whether Temujin or the Merkit captor was his true father. Temujin acknowledged Jochi as his son, but the doubt poisoned their relationship forever. After the victory over the Merkits, Temujin's reputation grew. Warriors began to gather around him. He had a gift for leadership that went beyond mere strength. He promoted men based on ability and loyalty rather than noble birth. He shared plunder fairly with his followers. He was ruthlessly practical, understanding that in the harsh world of the steppes, survival meant unity and strength. He formed a deep brotherhood with Jamuka, and for a time, they were inseparable, even performing the ancient ceremony of Anda, becoming sworn brothers who vowed to be as one soul in two bodies. But as Temujin's power grew, so did tensions with Jamuka. They were too similar, both natural leaders, both ambitious. Their followers began to choose sides. One night, Jamuka suggested they separate their camps, saying that the horses of the hill and the horses of the valley should not graze together. Temujin understood this was the end of their brotherhood. The two friends became rivals, then enemies. The steppe tribes were constantly at war with each other, a chaotic mess of shifting alliances and blood feuds that had continued for generations. Temujin began to see this differently. He understood that the Mongols were destroying themselves, that their constant internal warfare made them vulnerable and poor, while the great civilizations to the south grew rich and powerful. He began to envision something unprecedented, uniting all the nomadic tribes under a single ruler, bringing order to the chaos. This vision led to years of brutal warfare. Battle after battle, tribe after tribe, Temujin fought to unite the Mongols. He could be generous to those who surrendered, incorporating them into his growing army, giving them a place in his new order. But to those who resisted, he showed terrifying ruthlessness. After defeating the Tatars, the tribe that had murdered his father, he ordered the execution of every Tatar male taller than the height of a cart axle, effectively wiping out an entire generation. This brutality served a purpose beyond revenge. It sent a message across the steppes. Resistance meant annihilation, but submission meant survival and even prosperity. In 1201, Jamuka formed a coalition of tribes to oppose Temujin's growing power. The former blood brothers met in battle. The fighting was fierce and desperate, but Temujin's forces prevailed. Jamuka escaped, but his coalition was broken. Temujin's next great challenge came from Togrul, his old ally and patron. As Temujin grew more powerful, Togrul's son convinced his father that Temujin would eventually overthrow them. Togrul reluctantly agreed to eliminate his former protege, but Temujin learned of the plot. In a desperate night march, he led his followers away from certain destruction, though many warriors abandoned him, believing his cause was lost. This was Temujin's darkest hour. Reduced to a tiny force, hunted by his former allies, he retreated to a remote lake called Baljuna. There, according to legend, he and his few remaining loyal followers drank the muddy water together, swearing an oath of eternal loyalty. These men became the core of his greatest commanders, and the Baljuna Covenant became legendary among the Mongols. Temujin never forgot who stood with him when everything seemed lost, and he never forgot who abandoned him. But Temujin was a master strategist. He rebuilt his forces, made new alliances, and struck back. In 1203, he defeated Togrul in battle. The old Khan fled and was killed by border guards who did not recognize him. Temujin was merciful to Togrul's followers, incorporating them into his army, but he took Togrul's daughter as a wife, symbolically claiming the Karat legacy. Finally, in 1206, after years of warfare, Temujin stood victorious. He had defeated or absorbed every major tribe on the Mongolian steppes. A great gathering, a Kurultai, was called at the source of the Anan River, the same region where he had been born. Thousands of warriors assembled, representing all the Mongol tribes. There, in a ceremony that would echo through history, the tribal leaders proclaimed Temujin as Genghis Khan, meaning oceanic ruler or universal leader. At about 44 years old, the boy who had once eaten marmots to survive now ruled over a unified Mongol nation. But Genghis Khan was just beginning. Unification was only the first step. He immediately set about transforming Mongol society. He created a written code of laws called the Yasa, which applied to everyone equally, from the poorest herder to the Khan himself. This was revolutionary in a society that had operated on tribal customs and blood feuds. He organized his army into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, with clear chains of command. He established a system of mounted couriers who could carry messages across vast distances with incredible speed. He promoted religious tolerance, exempting priests and holy men of all faiths from taxes and military service. He recognized that a stable empire needed more than just military might. With Mongolia united, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the wealthy civilizations that surrounded his grassland empire. To the south lay the Jin dynasty of northern China, one of the most powerful and sophisticated kingdoms in the world. The Jin had treated the Mongol tribes with contempt for generations, forcing them to pay tribute, playing them against each other, and occasionally launching punitive raids. Genghis Khan decided to respond. In 1211, Mongol horsemen poured across the Jin border in a campaign that would last decades. The Mongols were outnumbered by the millions, facing armies with advanced weapons, fortified cities with massive walls, and resources that dwarfed their own. Yet, they had advantages that proved decisive. Mongol warriors grew up in the saddle, capable of riding for days on end, surviving on almost nothing. Each warrior had multiple horses, allowing them to travel at speeds that seemed impossible to their enemies. They could shoot arrows accurately while riding at full gallop, retreat and advance with perfect coordination, and execute complex battlefield maneuvers that bewildered opposing generals. Genghis Khan also proved to be a brilliant military innovator. When his cavalry encountered fortified cities, he recruited Chinese engineers who taught the Mongols to build and operate siege weapons, catapults, trebuchets, and siege towers. He practiced psychological warfare on a massive scale, sending advance riders to spread tales of Mongol atrocity, offering cities the choice of surrender or total destruction. Often, cities would open their gates rather than face annihilation. Those that resisted were destroyed so completely that they served as warnings to others. While campaigning in China, Genghis Khan turned his attention westward to the Great Khwarezmian Empire, which controlled much of Central Asia, including the fabled Silk Road trading routes. Initially, Genghis Khan sought trade and peace with the Khwarezmian Shah, sending a caravan of merchants with gifts and letters of friendship. But the governor of the border city of Otrar, suspecting the merchants were spies, had them killed and their goods seized. Genghis Khan sent ambassadors demanding justice. The Shah not only refused, but had one ambassador killed and sent the others back with their beards burned off. A terrible insult in Mongol culture. This was a fatal mistake. Genghis Khan assembled an army of perhaps 150,000 warriors, and in 1219 began a campaign of such devastating completeness that it still echoes through history. The Mongols crossed deserts that the Shah believed impassable, appearing where no army should be. They swept through Khwarezm like a scythe through wheat. Cities that had stood for centuries were leveled. In Bukhara, after the city surrendered, Genghis Khan reportedly entered the main mosque, climbed the pulpit, and told the assembled citizens that he was the flail of God, sent to punish them for their sins. Whether this actually happened or is merely legend, it captures how Genghis Khan understood and weaponized fear. But the most horrific destruction came at the city of Nishapur. There, a Mongol prince, Genghis Khan's favorite son-in-law, was killed during the siege. When the city finally fell, Genghis Khan's daughter, widow of the slain prince, was given the right of revenge. She ordered that every living thing in the city be killed, every building destroyed, and the site plowed over and planted with barley. Historical accounts claim that pyramids were made from the skulls of the dead. Though such numbers are likely exaggerated, still, the destruction was real and absolute. These acts of terrifying violence served a strategic purpose. They made future enemies more likely to surrender without fighting. During these campaigns, Genghis Khan's generals conducted reconnaissance expeditions that reached far beyond their conquered territories. Mongol scouts explored Russia, the Caucasus, and Eastern Europe. They gathered intelligence, learned about distant lands, and prepared the ground for future conquests. The Mongol intelligence network became legendary for its thoroughness. Throughout these years of conquest, Genghis Khan remained personally involved in military campaigns despite growing older. He was a demanding but fair leader to his men. He ate the same food as his soldiers, endured the same hardships, and distributed plunder generously. He recognized talent wherever he found it, promoting men from conquered peoples into high positions if they proved themselves capable and loyal. His closest advisors included a former enemy warrior, a Chinese scholar, and a Muslim administrator. This meritocratic approach was revolutionary for its time. In his personal life, Genghis Khan had multiple wives, following Mongol custom, but Borte remained his chief wife and closest companion. She was his advisor in matters of state, and he trusted her judgment. He had at least 8 children with Borte, including 4 sons who would play crucial roles in Mongol history: Jochi, Chagatai, Ogadai, and Tolui. But the question of succession troubled him. Jochi and Chagatai despised each other, with Chagatai constantly questioning Jochi's legitimacy. At a family meeting, their arguments grew so heated that Genghis Khan had to intervene, eventually selecting Ogadai as his heir because of his diplomatic skills and stable temperament. By 1225, Genghis Khan was in his 60s, ancient by the standards of steppe warriors. He had conquered an empire stretching from Korea to the Caspian Sea, uniting territories that had never before been connected. Under Mongol rule, the Silk Road became safer than it had been in centuries. Merchants could travel from one end of the empire to the other under Mongol protection, carrying not just goods, but ideas, technologies, and knowledge. But Genghis Khan was not finished. The Shia kingdom to the west of Mongolia had promised him troops, but failed to deliver. This betrayal gnawed at him. In 1226, despite his age and failing health, he launched a final campaign against Shia. During this campaign, according to various accounts, he was injured while hunting, either falling from his horse or being wounded by an arrow. The injury refused to heal properly. As his condition worsened, his generals urged him to return home, but Genghis Khan refused to leave the campaign unfinished. He continued directing military operations from his tent, even as his body failed him. The Shishi capital fell, and their king came to surrender. But Genghis Khan, in his final act of vengeance for their broken promises, ordered the royal family and much of the Shishi nobility executed, and their kingdom incorporated into the Mongol Empire. In August of 1227, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause remains uncertain. Some sources say the hunting injury became infected. Others claim he fell ill with a fever. Some legends say he was assassinated by a captured Shishia princess. The truth was lost to history, deliberately obscured by Mongol secrecy. What happened next demonstrates how deeply Genghis Khan had transformed his people. His death was kept secret from everyone outside his immediate family and closest generals. The army completed its campaign as if nothing had happened. His body was returned to Mongolia, and according to tradition, the escort killed anyone they encountered on the journey to prevent word from spreading. When they finally reached Mongolia, a Kurultai was held, and his death was announced. He was buried somewhere in the region of his birth, near the sacred Burkhan Khaldun mountain. But the location of Genghis Khan's tomb remains one of history's greatest mysteries. According to legend, after his burial, the funeral escort was killed by soldiers who were then killed by other soldiers, creating a chain of death that ensured no one living knew the exact location. The site was unmarked and deliberately concealed. Horses were supposedly run over the ground until no trace remained. Some legends say a river was diverted to flow over the tomb. To this day, despite numerous expeditions and modern technology, no one has found the grave of Genghis Khan. This secrecy was not just about protecting treasure buried with him. In Mongol belief, disturbing the grave of such a great leader would bring catastrophe. The hidden tomb became symbolic, suggesting that Genghis Khan's spirit still watched over his people, that he existed somewhere between the earthly and spiritual worlds. The empire he left behind continued to expand under his sons and grandsons, eventually becoming the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, from Siberia to Southeast Asia. His grandson Kublai Khan would conquer the rest of China and establish the Yuan dynasty. Another grandson, Hulagu, would destroy the Abbasid Caliphate and sack Baghdad. Batu Khan would establish the Golden Horde and terrorize Europe. The Mongol invasions changed the course of world history, connecting East and West in unprecedented ways, spreading technologies and ideas, and redrawing the map of the known world. But what kind of man was Genghis Khan? The historical record presents contradictions. He ordered massacres that killed millions, yet he promoted religious tolerance and protected scholars and artisans. He could be mercilessly cruel to enemies, yet fiercely loyal to those who served him faithfully. He rose from absolute poverty to absolute power through intelligence, determination, and ruthlessness. He united fractious tribes through a combination of charisma, strategic genius, and calculated terror. Modern estimates suggest that the Mongol conquests caused the deaths of approximately 40 million people, roughly 11% of the world's population at that time. Cities that took centuries to build were destroyed in days. Entire civilizations were shattered. Irrigation systems in Persia and Mesopotamia were destroyed, turning fertile land into desert that remains barren today. The psychological impact on survivors was profound, with some contemporary writers believing the Mongols were divine punishment for humanity's sins. Yet the Mongol Empire also had positive legacies. The Pax Mongolica created a period of relative peace and stability across Asia, allowing unprecedented cultural exchange. Paper money, printing, gunpowder, and the compass spread westward along Mongol trade routes. Scientific and mathematical knowledge flowed between China, the Islamic world, and Europe. The Mongols employed the first international postal system, maintained rest stations along major routes, and created the safest long-distance travel conditions the Silk Road had ever known. Genghis Khan's legal code promoted merit over birth, protected property rights, and established religious freedom. He banned the kidnapping of women, the selling of women, and enslavement for debt. He established systems for feeding the poor and caring for the elderly. These progressive policies coexisted with his devastating military campaigns. His genetic legacy is equally remarkable. A 2003 genetic study suggested that approximately 16 million men alive today, about 0.5% of the world's male population, carry a Y chromosome signature that originated in Mongolia about 1,000 years ago, possibly from Genghis Khan himself or his close male relatives. His descendants ruled vast territories for centuries, and many royal families across Asia claim descent from him. In Mongolia today, Genghis Khan is the supreme national hero. His face on currency, his name on airports and streets, his story taught to every child. Elsewhere in Asia, where Mongol invasions brought destruction, he remains a controversial figure, simultaneously respected for his military genius and condemned for the devastation he caused. In the West, he has been portrayed variously as a barbaric destroyer, a military genius, a unifier of nations, and a promoter of cultural exchange. Perhaps the truth encompasses all these contradictions. Genghis Khan was a product of his time and place, shaped by the brutal necessities of survival on the unforgiving steppes. He understood that in his world, power was the only security, conquest the only path to peace, and absolute dominance the only way to end the cycle of tribal warfare. He used terror as a weapon, as deliberately as he used cavalry charges. He was capable of great loyalty and great cruelty, of brilliant strategy and shocking violence. From a boy born clutching blood, to a slave in a wooden collar, to the ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen, Genghis Khan's life reads like an impossible legend. Yet it was real. A man with no education in the traditional sense, who could not read or write until late in life, who grew up in desperate poverty, somehow developed the strategic genius, leadership skills, and vision to conquer half the known world. He transformed warfare, politics, and even genetics in ways that still echo 8 centuries later. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the vast grasslands under an endless sky of stars, where a boy once looked up and dreamed impossible dreams. That boy changed the world, for better and for worse, in ways both terrible and remarkable. His empire eventually crumbled, as all empires do, but his name and deeds endured. Somewhere in Mongolia, hidden beneath the earth, unmarked and unguarded, lies the grave of Temujin, the blacksmith's son, the boy with blood in his fist, the man the world came to know and fear as Genghis Khan, whose spirit perhaps still rides the endless winds across the steppes he once ruled absolutely. Sleep now, and let history carry you to dreams.